Hello, tonight part 2 of a special masterpiece season that celebrates the centenary of cinema. It's a 5-part series called The Last Machine, which looks at the exciting early years of the silver screen, the first movies and inventions and visionaries, and it's all linked to experiments of the day in literature, art and science. The series is presented by the filmmaker and great enthusiast Terry Gilliam, who's woven together the widest range of early films ever seen on television, including the first crime, science fiction and horror movies, and also early westerns, comedy and early erotica. Each week there's a different theme, and tonight the second part looks at the discovery of actuality, the early films that were precursors to our news and current affairs programs. You can imagine the excitement to see for the first time events like battlefields and medical operations on film, some of them faked and some the real thing. The program also goes to the giant Paris Expo in the year 1900, where the Lumiere film company mounted a display screen that demonstrated the use of sound with moving pictures for the first time.
This is a trip back to the beginning of our century, to the moment when history was first caught by the moving pictures. It's the story of early filmmaking and of the first movies and their audiences. But it's also about the figures in the shadows, writers, artists, and visionaries of all kinds who looked forward to the age of cinema and to the modern world that came with it.
Greatest display of American progress assembled here on the shores of the Great Lakes at Buffalo to mark the start of a new century. Get your official 20th century souvenirs at the Gift Emporium. See the authentic Japanese village. Chew blubber with real Eskimos at the Eskimo Village. Mind your hands.
First-hand experience was something the Victorians took very seriously, traveling and researching in all directions. But film brought the world back home in a totally new way. Now the four corners of the globe could appear as dramatically and easily as the microscopic life of insects. There was a new audience avid for stories from the real world, and soon these films would replace reality itself.
This is one of the films that Thomas Edison's company made at the exposition in 1901. Couldn't resist a bit of product placement with all those light bulbs. Edison had the exclusive franchise for filming at the expo and had already got 20 films in the can before President McKinley came to tour the exhibition in September.
They filmed the president making a speech and were waiting for him to come out of the reception in the Temple of Music when they learned that inside he'd been shot by an assassin. The camera crew filmed the waiting crowd as the news spread, and when President McKinley died a week later, Edison crews were assigned to follow the stages of the elaborate funeral. A catalogue of films was rushed out and audiences flocked to see them. The only missing item was the execution of McKinley's killer, a Cleveland anarchist named Zolgos. The Edison team could film the exterior of Albany Jail, but they weren't allowed inside. Their ingenious solution was to stage the electrocution, playing the parts themselves. For the first time, moving pictures had captured a major news story live. When showmen presented the McKinley films as a sequence, they were following a well-established tradition, the Magic Lantern Show. But moving pictures were still newfangled, and a dead president required something more dignified. Edison offered a special end-of-show memorial film made in true magic lantern style. Moving pictures still owed a lot to the tradition that preceded them. Magic lanterns had been used for high-class entertainment for over 200 years before their heyday in the mid-19th century. Lantern shows were social occasions, first for the well-to-do, and then for a much wider audience as churches and societies popularized them. Photography made lantern slides cheaper and easier to produce. New sources of illumination, limelight, gas, and eventually electricity, meant lanterns could be used in larger halls. Lantern shows became a kind of guided tour, and often the guides were missionaries bringing a glimpse of the exotic to the church hall, or clergymen using the new medium for the same old message.
Welcome, my friend. Let us begin with a scene which never fails to impress. One of nature's greatest spectacles. The great waterfall on the Tugela River in Natal. The dark continent is blessed with many such marvels of nature. And I am here to talk to you this evening about another of nature's marvels. One that brings great blessings, but also great wickedness to men's hearts. I refer to the great diamond mines at Kimberley, where also great quantities of gold have recently been discovered. Gold and diamonds. Riches which may assist the spread of Christian civilization, but which may also encourage envy, greed, and sinfulness. It is not money, as the Epistle to Timothy reminds us, but the love of money which lies at the root of all evil. The work of our missionaries among the savage tribes of Africa is even more important today as the dark continent glitters with its new-found wealth. I feel confident that on your way out, you will give generously for the Lord's work.
The travel lecture by lantern became a popular rehearsal for the real thing, much safer than venturing abroad and improving. The magic lantern turned the world into portable images. But what about bringing it all back home for real? The 19th century also saw an explosion of museums, zoos, circuses, displays of all kinds.
Possibly the last chance to see the incredible Fiji mermaid at Phineas T. Barnum's American Museum. Today, tomorrow, and every day. It's your chance to decide, is the mermaid a work of nature or a work of art? Come and judge for yourself.
Phineas T. Barnum was the first modern showman, the man who invented publicity. He was also a charlatan. The Fiji mermaid turned out to be the top half of a monkey sewn onto a fish. No matter, he knew his public really longed for sensation more than education, as long as he could make it all seem respectable.
My most earnest hope is for a world that will learn peace through trade and industry. I therefore commend to you this great exhibition, which will display all the arts and crafts of our beloved empire, brought together under one very large roof in Hyde Park.
The Great Exhibition of 1851 was the greatest show of all time. People came from all over the world to marvel. Prince Albert thought it could put the world to rights. He didn't know he was inventing theme parks. Barnum and Albert, two sides of the same Victorian coin. By the end of the century, they had really started something, the age of the exposition. Expos were like encyclopedias you could walk through, or a three-ring circus with a mission to inform. They were all about showing off how much you'd conquered, how much you'd manufactured, how far you'd come. In terms of spectacle and scale, the expos were the forerunners of what cinema would become. The fantastic pavilions and villages built for the exhibitions were movie sets before there were movies. The 1900 exposition in Paris was planned as the most spectacular of them all, a birthday party for the new century. For the first time, the cameras were there to record the crowds and all the new wonders and gadgets, like the moving pavement. Film was also featured in the exhibition, as well as recording it. It appeared in the catalog as Class 12, Group 3, tucked away between typography and sheet music. All the inventors saw it as an opportunity to demonstrate their wares and go one bigger or better. The Lumiere display was on a giant screen in the gallery of machines, 65 feet wide. Underneath it was a fountain that made it transparent so that people could watch from both sides. The program changed regularly so that by the end, 1.5 million people had seen a total of 150 Lumiere films and full-color slides. Even more spectacular was the City-O-Rama, a 360-degree presentation of a balloon trip. To prepare for it, the inventor had gone aloft with no less than 10 cameras mounted like the spokes of a wheel. The result was shown on a wraparound screen 300 feet in circumference with 10 separate projectors. The audience was installed in the center in a mock-up balloon basket. Spectacular? Yes! Pity more people didn't get to see it, though. Unfortunately, on the very day it opened, it was closed out as a fire risk. Adding sound to moving pictures was the other big novelty of Paris 1900. There were at least 3 systems on show. Now remember, this is almost 30 years before The Jazz Singer. One system featured an extraordinary array of acting talent, including Sarah Bernhardt as Hamlet.
Moi, brave ouvrier, dimanche, quand vient le printemps, si ma poule met sa robe blanche et sert au passant, il fait un soleil superbe, on va faire tous les deux un petit déjeuner sur l'herbe comme 2 amoureux. On va s'emporter, de quoi boulotter, le train va partir, tu vas nous le faire rater. Anna, qu'est-ce que t'attends? Anna, qu'est-ce que t'attends? Prends le panier, moi je vais prendre le restant. N'oublie pas le melon et les harengs. Anna, qu'est-ce que t'attends? Après que tu mets le temps pour passer ton jupon blanc et pour enfiler tes gants. Anna, qu'est-ce que t'attends?
By 1910, pop promo films were common. It was the dream of recreating opera in sound and vision that had first inspired the pioneers. This is Alice Guy directing an early opera scene for the Gaumont Company. But talking pictures also opened up exciting prospects for the new science of anthropology. What fascinated audiences was actuality, the power of cinema to make them a part of history as it was happening. Almost immediately, cinema was enlisted to bring back moving pictures from the battlefields. But there were real problems of access and getting close enough to film effectively in the field. One solution which was tried was restaging the Boer War in Earl's Court. And again in New Jersey. A reconstruction could show people what they knew had happened, looking just like it should. Films like these were billed somewhat ambiguously, but authenticity wasn't the same issue that it's become today. Some were more obviously fake than others, like this Pathe version of the attempted Russian Revolution of 1905, which nevertheless had all the impact of frontline news reporting. "20 years later, the great Russian director Eisenstein would use the same incident of a mutiny on the battleship Potemkin for his classic film. As well as simply reenacting real events, filmmakers were also discovering powerful new ways of improving on them. In George Méliès' reconstruction of the famous Dreyfus trial, the camera is used for truly dramatic effect as the journalists spill past the camera and out of the courtroom. In England, James Williamson had the nerve to stage a skirmish from the Chinese Boxer Rebellion, one of the other big news stories of the time, in a front garden in Hove. When he cuts away from the attack to show the Marines coming to the rescue, he introduces audiences to a viewpoint which could never be captured in a real battle. Film was beginning to impose its own kind of storytelling on real events, involving viewers in a completely new way. But sometimes involvement got filmmakers into trouble, as it did the pioneer of medical films, Louis Doyen.
The main problem in teaching surgery is how the students get to see the surgeon at work. So I had a wonderful idea. I hired a cameraman from the Lumiere company, no less, to film operations. I thought my colleagues would appreciate my work. But no, for some reason, they absolutely hated it. After I had screened some of my films at a medical conference in Edinburgh in 1898, they banned me from showing my films at professional gatherings. Absurd. What were they afraid of? I carried on with my work anyway, until things got worse. In 1902, I filmed my operation to separate the celebrated Siamese twins Radica and Dudica, a fascinating addition to my collection. What I didn't know was that my trusty cameraman had made dozens of copies of the film and was selling them to fun fairs, to the freak show. Marvelous, eh? You can imagine the effect it had on my reputation. Moving pictures.
But Doyen was vindicated in the end. Medical films were eventually accepted as the valuable teaching aids he had foreseen. Harrowing scenes like this were cheerfully included in sideshows and general cinema programs. Moving pictures had the shocking ability to take ordinary viewers behind closed doors. All over the world there was a huge new appetite for actuality films waiting to be satisfied. And not all of it was so gruesome. There was a fascination with professions and processes of all kinds. Industrials, as they became known, told a new kind of story. They documented how trades were carried on, how things were made, and the typical day in every kind of factory imaginable. These were just slices of ordinary life. What made them so attractive may have been the novelty of seeing into other people's lives, or the unexpected beauty of the industrial processes, or, more likely, it was the discovery of film's unique power to find or shape a story out of almost any material. The idea that animals lived in societies just as complex as human ones was becoming popular at this time. Insect behavior was being studied and compared with human endeavor. Now, for the first time, you could actually see these insect societies in action. Filming through a microscope brought previously unseen worlds to life. A pond or even a leaf turned out to be teeming with intrigue. This was nature writ large as drama. Or comedy. It wasn't long before filmmakers started poking fun at the fashion for taking nature so seriously. Starevich was another naturalist whose films took an interesting turn. His first love was the study of insects, and he dreamt, like most of us, of making a film of stag beetles, fighting. The problem was that his beetles had the unfortunate habit of dying under the hot studio lights. But rather than give up, he hit upon the idea of making realistic-looking models. So successful were they that over the course of 4 films, Starevich became a pioneer of puppet animation, and freed from the constraints of nature, his insects gradually took on more and more human characteristics. In The Cameraman's Revenge, a beetle stands to lose his inheritance if his secret marriage is discovered. A jealous rival records his indiscretions, a timely comment on the new status of film as evidence. Starevich made his extraordinary films using the painstaking stop-motion process of filming a single frame at a time. Another film technique which transformed people's understanding of the natural world was time-lapse photography, which allowed you to see the life story of a flower unfold in front of your eyes. And from about 1905, you could often see it in surprisingly lifelike color. It's a myth that color didn't appear until the 1930s. The earliest films were hand-colored frame by frame, but soon mechanized stencil coloring was developed by Pathe and Gaumont, and was soon widely used. Seeing films in plain monochrome was very much the exception during the whole silent period. There was a huge paying audience for popular science and all kinds of non-fiction films in the decade leading up to the war. But it was a very different story in the schools. A debate was raging over the educational value of moving pictures.
I have here the excellent catalogue produced by Mr. Charles Urban, whose motto, I would remind you, is "We put the world before you." As a scientist, I can assure you that the use of these kinematograph films will enable everyone to have a true conception of what the microscopists are actually studying. I look forward to the provision, not later than next year, of a kinematograph lantern in every board school and in every college classroom.
I am obliged to say that I very much doubt the value of bioscope pictures in education. A good teacher studies the different capacity of his class. This is possible when using diagrams, or even lantern slides. But the mechanical, regular movement of the bioscope offers no such opportunity. But to the mental strain on the backward part of the class, there is to be added the cerebral excitement of this process. And of course, the strain and damage to the eyesight.
Damage to the eyesight? Gentlemen, film projectors are already being used in schools on the continent. Is it not obvious that an invention as wonderful as a cinematograph can have an influence that is both instructive and moral, especially on the young? I have been giving film shows to the youth of my parish in Basel every week for 10 years. And I am confident that this is of great benefit to my ministry.
The Abbé Joie's vast film collection has been preserved, and it shows he kept a shrewd eye on new trends over the first decade of the century, as well as continuing the magic lantern tradition of giving a running commentary.
And they tell us that man is no more than a clever monkey. Well, these good people certainly don't seem too pleased to see their ancestor. Doesn't all this help remind us how absurd are the ideas of Mr. Darwin and his followers?
The Abbé Joie had no doubt about the value of film and its ability to influence opinion. But the simple fact of appearing on film had a power of its own. It was about to become an essential qualification for 20th century celebrities, like Theodore Roosevelt, the president who woke America up to the new century.
I have been accused by some of my political rivals of making undue use of moving pictures in order to further my political interest. Let me say here and now, categorically, that my current visit to Europe and Africa is of a purely private nature. So too are the motion pictures that are being taken to add to my personal library.
Theodore Roosevelt grasped the power of film early on. He appeared as vice president in the coverage of the McKinley funeral. Once he became president, there was no holding him. He was filmed everywhere, doing everything. He even took his personal cameraman on safari to Africa. Inevitably, his appetite for publicity made him an easy target for satire. Here, even the animals know he's coming. And in this early lampoon, he's accompanied by a press agent and a photographer. But Roosevelt knew that all publicity is good publicity. Louis Blériot became an instant celebrity when he flew the English Channel in 1909. Naturally, the cameramen were on hand to record the takeoff and landing. It was a perfect media event, right down to the human interest detail.
How did the newsreels present my historic flight? Blériot exchanges crutches for wings. It's true. I had an abscess on my foot and had to hobble to my plane, but the impact that film had. Everywhere, people began to realize that flying had arrived. And I became a hero.
Being a hero in the 20th century soon meant arranging film coverage of your exploits. When Captain Scott started planning his second expedition to the South Pole, he knew that film would be a vital and commercially valuable record, and he was lucky enough to recruit Herbert Ponting as the expedition's photographer. Ponting won Scott's admiration for his tireless enthusiasm, filming and photographing constantly for 6 months. The first installment of Ponting's remarkable film reached Britain at the end of 1911 and was rapturously received. When he added a commentary 20 years later, he remembered Scott's interest in his filming.
I recall a remark which Captain Scott made at this time. He turned to the others and said, "What fun it will be when we are home again and see this at the cinema."
Well, Captain Scott didn't manage to survive to see himself on the screen, but Ponting's film was seen by millions during the years after his death. It became his monument and another first for film. Thanks to the movies, exploration had become a spectator sport. Remote tribes stopped being remote, and you could see rare animals every day of the week. Captain Scott became familiar to every school child in Britain, and the same was happening in other countries with other heroes. Soon the movies became a benchmark. If it wasn't on the screen, it didn't matter. Or hadn't happened. But if it was, then you'd better believe it.